All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. Another really fun week in the ACC. Some drama there late in Durham as SMU was able to hold on. Clemson on a bye. They weren't too impacted this weekend. And then Miami's game never really in question, though it was theoretically close with a few minutes to go. It never looked like they really had a shot to lose that. And so all three teams hold steady where they were. Everyone's still undefeated in the ACC. And today we're going to talk about some of those ACC scenarios, maybe bring up another scenario that no one's considering or maybe hasn't really thought about yet because we've been pretty dialed into this one. Update you on who to cheer for, of course, this week if you're a fan of one of these teams or if you're a hater of one of these teams. And then also maybe ask you guys some questions, get some thoughts from you guys at some point today. But if you're watching this, we don't ask you for a lot. We don't ask you to sign up or buy anything. I don't really put ads on these videos for you guys. As you know, YouTube puts ads, but I'm not putting like sponsorship type stuff that we do. We haven't done that yet. We may at some point, but if you could do me the favor of subscribing, I think this has been a fun series, and hopefully you guys will continue to enjoy it. Miami did extend a little bit of a lead, and I'll show you kind of how the week went. Now, obviously, when you are looking at this, you can see on Thursday night that Pitt won. That was good for Clemson and SMU. Louisville won that was Thursday. On Friday night, Louisville won, which ended up being good for Clemson and Miami. Virginia Tech won. That ended up being better for Clemson than anyone else. It was kind of good for SMU because it kept them a little closer to Miami, as we had told you earlier in the week. UNC got a blowout win against UVA. That ended up being really good for Miami. Wake winning was good for Miami. And then obviously in the last two games, Miami is going to want to win their game and SMU is going to want to win their game. And so that all kind of went down about like it was expected. Miami extended their lead on SMU, and a little bit of what I told you guys last week is kind of taking shape. Clemson and Miami's opponents are just tougher, and they're starting to separate. And that likely isn't great news for SMU this week either. We'll talk about that in just a moment. A quick refresh for you. If you haven't checked out the other videos in this series, if all three teams finish undefeated in the conference, the tiebreaker will be opponents' records. That's going to favor Clemson the most, probably Miami the second most, but things can certainly change. The first time we did this, Miami was on the outside looking in. And so you could have a scenario where SMU jumps back up in. But as of right now, it's looking like Clemson and Miami. Miami, again, would have been out a couple of weeks ago, and then Clemson would have been out the week after that, and then it's been SMU the last couple of weeks. Outside of ACC records don't matter. I know that Clemson has a loss to Georgia. SMU has a loss to BYU. Also, two teams that have played really well, two top 15 teams at this point, obviously. Those don't matter for the ACC. And I know a lot of you ask about Pitt. A lot of people want to know, well, where's Pitt at in this? Pitt cannot finish undefeated in the conference with two other teams. Now, they can finish undefeated in the conference. They certainly control their own destiny. If they win out, they will be in Charlotte. Because they played two of the teams on here, it's impossible for Pitt and two other teams to finish undefeated. If Pitt just wins out, we're going to have a Pitt-Miami conference championship, and that'll be that, right? That may happen. I don't know. I'm not predicting that happens, but Pitt cannot figure into this three-way tie. I do have something for Pitt, though, in a little bit, so don't jump away just yet. For SMU, they survived against Duke, and they have a tough opponent in those very Pitt Panthers that we just talked about this weekend. More importantly for them than anything else is making sure they take care of business on the field. Can't worry about opponents' records, can't worry, and I know the team's not anyway. Lashley does a good job of keeping the guys focused. For SMU, it's really more about just winning this weekend. This is their toughest game left, in my opinion, and so they certainly need to make sure that they take care of business on the field, let the opponent's record stuff figure itself out over the rest of the month of November. We are working on both getting someone from Pitt and someone from SMU to speak this week on the channel, so make sure that you're locked in so you don't miss that later on. Obviously, that game is huge as the loser isn't eliminated, but they certainly make it a lot tougher on themselves to get to the conference championship game if they can't win it. So after the last week, we have not had a change at the top. Miami and Clemson are still at the top when it comes to opponents' records. Now, if you exclude Louisville and Florida State from those top three, all three schools, Miami, Clemson, and SMU, play them. Miami's opponents' records is 12-14. Clemson's are 12-13, and SMU's are 9-16. Now, it seems like a big disparity, but when you think about it, Clemson has a half a game lead essentially over Miami. If Clemson's opponents have played one less game, if that one game ends up being a loss, then they're going to be tied. If that one game ends up being a win, then Clemson will be ahead by the full game. If you look at that the same way you think about a baseball series, SMU is trailing Miami by 2.5 games. There are 4 weeks left. Theoretically, they could make up a game each week, and that gap isn't so big. So 4 weeks left, anything's doable. They kind of need to gain a game a week, and they'll be fine. But also it could go the other way. Miami could gain a game a week. And if it gets to 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, then you're certainly looking there like SMU is going to be in trouble. So let's quickly look at the schedule for this week and who needs to cheer for what. We're trying to move this along quickly. I don't believe in dragging these things out for any reason, but let's look at the schedule. In the UNC Florida State game, ironically, this game means absolutely nothing. There is no benefit to either of these teams winning the game. Now, Miami fans, I know that you just don't like Florida State, and so you probably will not cheer for them, but the game has no impact on your final result. Same for Clemson, same for SMU. Everyone plays Florida State, so if Florida State wins, that helps everybody. If Florida State loses, that hurts everybody equally. No one plays North Carolina. North Carolina skating by, not having to play the toughest 3 teams in the conference in Miami, Clemson, and SMU. Still not a great team, but they did kind of get fortunate with the way that draw went. And so this result does not have any impact. Now, there is another scenario that we'll talk about in just a few minutes, but I don't want to jump around too much. Give me a moment and we'll get to it, where that game could make an impact. Duke at Miami. Look at the bottom 3. Louisville and Clemson, Pitt and SMU. Obviously, those teams that are in the contest want to win. The teams that are not in each specific contest want the other team to win. Clemson wants Duke to win. SMU wants Duke to win. Miami and SMU want Louisville to win. And then, of course, Miami and Clemson want Pitt to win in that scenario. Pretty obvious on that. That just leaves us with 2 games that matter for this week's tiebreakers, which is crazy. There's 6 ACC games. Only 2 of them matter. Now, the other 3 do matter. I will say that. Miami loses, that matters. SMU loses, that matters. Clemson loses, that matters. But for the tiebreaker specifically, if the teams at the top hold serve, for the tiebreaker specifically, we have Stanford and North Carolina State, and we also have Virginia Tech and Syracuse. When it comes to Stanford and North Carolina State, now SMU only plays Stanford, so they need them to win. Clemson actually plays both of these teams, so their overall record is going to stay the same either way, but they should want to widen their lead over SMU, so they should cheer for NC State. Miami doesn't play either, but again, they should want what's worse for SMU, and they should want to widen that lead, so they should cheer for NC State as well. The last game, Virginia Tech at Syracuse. Miami plays both of them. So again, they're going to get a win and a loss either way here, but Clemson only plays Virginia Tech. So they should cheer for Syracuse. Clemson should cheer for Virginia Tech because they play them, obviously. And then SMU should cheer for Syracuse too, because it could get them 1 game closer to Clemson. And that's it. Those are the only 2 games that matter for this 3-way race. Now, what really matters, though, is obviously Miami and Duke, Louisville and Clemson. If one of the big 3 in the conference at this point lose, SMU and Pitt, a massive game, then obviously the whole scenario goes away. But with regards to the tiebreaker, if all 3 of those teams hold serve, those are the only 2 games that matter. So the bad news for SMU is that the best case scenario for them is they can only pick up 1 game on Miami this weekend. And that's if Stanford upsets North Carolina State. And I'm not necessarily here to pick games. I haven't really given predictions on these videos, but I lean North Carolina State in that game. Now, they could pick up 2 games on Clemson in theory, but for that, they'd need 2 upsets, with Syracuse beating Virginia Tech and Stanford beating North Carolina State. So we'll see if that can happen. For a side note, ESPN has Virginia Tech as about a 69% chance winner, and they have North Carolina State as over a 76% chance winner. Now, if both go that way, the way that ESPN projects and the way that Vegas thinks they'll go, SMU is going to be falling pretty far behind and going to have a lot of ground to make up. And we'll obviously keep you updated there because a lot can change in just a couple of weeks. If you were to get 4 of 6 results to go your way, that'd be a big, big deal. Also, if Miami or Clemson or SMU obviously drops a game anywhere along the way, it bolsters the other teams in the conference chances massively. Now, there is a fun new possible scenario that we talked about that I'm not going to dive too far into, but one that we'll just kind of allude to a little bit as a possibility as of now. Now, even though SMU nearly lost to Duke, ESPN still says that they have a 70% chance to beat Pitt at home. But if they don't, things could certainly get interesting. Just keeping it real, I don't see Miami dropping a game for the rest of the year, but Clemson and Pitt both have really tough ones down the stretch, and we know that SMU plays Pitt this week, which is also a tough one. Clemson has to play Virginia Tech, Louisville, and Pittsburgh. They could drop any of those games. Not saying they will. I'd probably pick Clemson in all three, but they certainly could drop any of those games. And Pitt has to play SMU and Clemson. They also got to go on the road to BC. If SMU was to lose this week and then Pitt and Clemson each drop a game, we could end up with this same crazy scenario with a three-team tie, a three-team race for the second place spot in the conference, assuming that Miami wins out, which again, at this point, I think they will. Who do they have left? Miami, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and then one other game that's just not coming to me off the top of my head. Miami fans will tell me in the comments which one that is. But I don't see Miami dropping a game. Now, I'm not going to dive into that whole second place, three-team tiebreaker scenario just yet. We don't need to until some people start dropping some games. But I don't think that just because one team loses, whether that be SMU or Clemson or whomever, we can't still have some fun breaking this thing down. I also might do this for the SEC after, maybe even before the Bama LSU game, start looking at scenarios there. I don't know if that's something you guys would care about or not, or if you really just care about it because these are your teams. But there are currently 4 teams with 1 loss and 1 undefeated team in the SEC. If that's something you would want me to break down, I'm happy to start to dive into some of those scenarios. So just let me know down in the comments. If you don't, that's not a big deal. Maybe I'd find the right people that do care about it, that have teams in the SEC. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one. Listen, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm not sure that we find out a lot this week, but SMU honestly just needs to focus on winning, and every other thing could potentially take care of itself in another week. They could fall further behind, though. They need a couple of upsets to kind of maintain that race. Their schedule is weaker. That has helped them win a lot of games, but it's also hurting them now that the opponents they're playing are starting to lag behind and behind and behind. Now, we will keep you updated on this one way or the other. And even if SMU was to lose to Pitt this week, we would still have 3 undefeated teams in the ACC as long as Miami and Clemson hold serve. We'll do a video on it. It won't be a 3-way tie video, but we will do a video on what that second place tie may look like, or the matchup with Clemson and Pitt that may decide who goes to the ACC championship. If Clemson drops a game along the way, it certainly is going to get hairy and interesting down the stretch. And man, if Miami drops a game and we all end up with a big 4-way, 1-loss tie, it's going to be really crazy. Not projecting any of that, but we've now done this for 4 weeks. People said we were crazy when we first started it, but we are now into November as far as when the games will be played. And we're still hanging around with this 3-team tie at the top. And Vegas says we're going to have it again next week when we meet back here on Sunday. Listen, I appreciate you guys as always for tuning in. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for me. Again, it doesn't cost you anything, but it certainly helps us continue to grow this. And we're inching closer to 15,000 subs. It's going to be a fun goal to hit. And then we'll quickly dust that off and try and get up to 20. But it's been fun to build this. It's been fun to do these videos each week, and I hope you guys are enjoying them. Hope you guys are screenshotting that picture that we throw up on the screen. I see it on Twitter and X and get tagged in on Instagram here and there. It's fun to watch you guys kind of taking that and using it on Saturdays. Easier this week. You only have 2 games to really remember. The other ones are pretty obvious, but I appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in to College Football Addiction.